Okay, so in my last video, I went on this long-ass 15-minute rant about Hibike Euphonium and how the show seems like a Yuri show, but then apparently isn't. And a lot of the comments, in fact, like most of them that I've gotten on that video, accused Hibike Euphonium of queer baiting, of trying to have the appearance of Yuri to rope in a certain audience, even though the show is not really about that. And I find that really difficult to imagine is the case. I'm much more inclined to blame this on incompetence and just not good handling of the material, as opposed to anything cynical such as queerbaiting, for several reasons that I'm going to get into. The first of which is that this is just a bad way to do that if you were trying to do that. Like, the idea of making the reason that like cynical media exists, stuff that's just trying to grab a certain niche rather, if you were trying to do that, you don't make the prettiest show in the universe and put all this effort into it, because at this level of effort, you're just making a show that people are going to watch because it's good. You're not making a show that people are watching just to get their little niche appreciation of it. If you want to make a Yuri bait show, you make a cheap, shitty fucking thing that is just trying to, grab that little audience. Because, frankly, the audience for Yuri is not very big. That's a pretty small niche. Why would you expend such effort on trying to bait in that audience? It would just be misguided, especially because in the end, when it turns out that it's not really Yuri, that audience is just going to be pissed. So I really don't think that's what they were going for here. And Kyoto Animation in general, I think, is probably the least cynical anime studio out there. This is a studio that almost, defies what seems like the good decisions to make from a marketability standpoint. They seem to go out of their way to make shows that are just what they want them to be and not what's going to please the audience. They have a lot of successful franchise that they decided not to run into the ground. Never made a K-On! College Years show. They made season 2 of Haruhi where they reanimated the same episode 8 fucking times, pissing off everyone and pleasing nobody, which surely they must have known would happen. But what were they trying to do? Just, I don't know, flex nuts and show that they could do that. Just make something ridiculously ambitious regardless of who it was going to please. And then, not keep making Haruhi after that. They didn't make Disappearance of Yuki Nagato. It ended up being, JC Staff. And they have gone seemingly out of their way in some of their fan service shows to, not have fan service. You look at Amagi Brilliant Park, and that show, it's obvious that there's certain scenes that are meant to be fan service scenes in the original novel that the show seems to, hide from. There's a scene where the main character walks in on the girl changing in episode 1, and even though they had, a full-blown ass shot, it shows for, a fraction of a second. They didn't want to dwell on it. They were ashamed that it was in there. There's a scene where all the characters, this is the most, egregious one to me. There's a scene in, episode 3 or 4 where all the girls get into swimsuits and they're supposed to jump up and down for this YouTube video that they're trying to advertise the park. And it's obvious that what you're supposed to be imagining here is all of them with their giant tits flopping around. They didn't animate any bounce. They gave no bounce to the boobs. It's like they were ashamed of having to do these fan service segments and toned them down. Now, not to say that they never do fan service. They did a lot of it in, Musagen no Phantom World, though they did it mostly in really hilarious ways, where it was equally funny as it was tantalizing. But I really think this is a studio that in many ways runs away from the cynicism of trying to appeal to the audience. They really want to make stuff that's just good. And I think what they were going for with Hibike Euphonium is not queer bait, but Oscar bait. They were trying to make something that would be this very visually intensive, beautiful, gorgeous show that people would talk about for how pretty it is. And I think that's how they fucked up. I think the reason that those scenes feel so romantic and so, loving is just because they went too far on making the scenes really beautiful. I think that, they really were just trying to convey adolescent friendship, but in order to do that, to make those moments really pop and to really stand out and be these memorable moments of their friendship deepening, they went all out on painting them in these gorgeous, lighting and colors and effects, and it just gives you the wrong impression. You know, it just feels like when you see something like that, normally you ascribe certain feelings to it. And the reason I think this is the case, because this might sound unlikely, but I really think this is something Kyoto Animation's always had a problem with. And I wrote a piece a few years back, a short piece about Hyoka, towards the end of 2014, and why I don't like that show. And one of my big complaints about it is that I think it's over animated. I think that in Hyoka, the show goes so far trying to make every shot like dynamic and distinct, and like characters like weird camera angles, characters doing really crazy movements. Every time there's like a visualizer on screen, it's like this super well animated thing, and it's all kind of unnecessary for what's actually happening in the show, which is like characters sitting around talking, you know? It's as though they wanted, because they felt they had like this deep and an interesting storyline, and they thought like, we're gonna make this an amazing show, and it's gonna be so mind-blowing, there's gonna be so much animation, but like, it didn't need to have that much animation, and it's just distracting. It's just like, it's hard to even follow the show sometimes, because there's just so much fucking shit going on that has nothing to do with like conveying the actual feelings of those scenes. It's just like flexing nuts. It's just showing how much animation they can do. And it doesn't have the same feeling that a Shaft show does, where in Shaft, like with something like Monogatari, where they'll throw these incredibly well animated segments at the most meaningless moments, and you can tell it's on purpose. This happens in a lot of Shaft work, because Shaft's stories are all these sort of weird, sarcastic, irreverent things that really are trying for the mass market appeal, but doing so in a blatant and tongue-in-cheek way, where the first episode of Bakemonogatari opens on an unbelievably well-animated panty shot, you know, just because they're literally saying like, this is what you want, right? You know, and it is what we want, because it's awesome. The way they handle it is so like, it's just so interesting. But I don't think that a show like Hyoka is going for that. I think they're really just trying to make every moment as well animated as possible when it's not necessary. And so it leads to this effect where when they want to have the really special moments in that show, then like all of reality has to change. Where like, you know, when I don't remember what her name is, the main girl, Chitanda, when she like gets in the main character's face and like, you know, says, I'm curious, and like the world has to transform into a fantasy landscape with trees branching out everywhere, because like, how else can you even communicate something special in a show where every moment is like a crazy, you know, unique piece of animation? And so when I look at Euphonium, which seems to go so far out of its way to be like classy and to present this idea that it's something deeper, where, you know, they ask the actresses to tone down the moe in the second season and to try to sound more real, because they're trying to create this rustic atmosphere, and everything's so perfect and calculated in these big magical moments. And I really think that it's just a matter of trying too hard for trying to capture like beauty, as opposed to thinking about what that's going to tell the audience. What is the audience going to think? When I watch Hyoka, I just get exhausted, because moments that don't mean anything are animated so ridiculously as though they do. And it just leaves me thinking like, God, what I'd kill to have a show where these, like, the real moments are animated this well, you know, where like the things that actually matter stand out and are different from what's going on. It's just so extreme. And yeah, like, I mean, I don't know how else they would have conveyed those really, you know, standout moments other than to handle it that way. But like, it's just that when they do that, that's the impression it gives. It gives you this feeling like when you see a character, you know, pushing her hair back and she's all backlit by everything. In any other show, that's the moment the main character's fallen in love. In any other show, that's the moment when you think, wow, like, the emotions are riding so high here. But the actual emotion that the show's trying to convey is something much more subdued. And I think it would have been better for a more subdued image. You know, something that's not so beautiful, that's not so, like, romantic. Maybe Euphonium was not the right show to put those moments in. If that's not what they were going for, if they weren't trying to make a romance anime, they should have saved those for a romance anime, you know? That's just how I'm inclined to think of it, and I could be wrong. I just don't think this was done from a place of cynicism. And you could argue that again that it's just audience interpretation. Some people don't even see it the way I see it. Some people didn't interpret it as romance. I just think that they didn't think hard enough about how people would interpret it. If that's what they were, if they weren't going for romance, they didn't think about it hard enough. And this is a problem that's not just unique to Kyoto Animation. I really I feel the same way about the director who did Grimgar and also the movie Nerabareta Gakuen, where in his work, there's moments that are just like crazy animation for just characters sitting around, for characters just shooting the shit. And it really is distracting. It makes me feel like, why are you putting so much emphasis on this moment? Because it just makes the whole thing feel like a wash. Like everything is just treated the same. And you really need that peaks and valleys in a series for the really important stuff to stand out and for the not important stuff to not. And I mean, Hibike Euphonium's fine in that regard. It's not like everything in the show looks unbelievably gorgeous. But even just to talk about like transitions, there was a moment in season 2 that I noticed where the camera cuts away to like a tree and there's two bugs fighting on the tree, like two cicadas fighting. And now it's pretty common in anime and in Japanese films in general. I think Ozu, Yasujiro Ozu, might have been the guy who like originated this technique of like cutting to power lines or cutting to like a cicada on the ground, just to break away from the current scene and give you like a resting moment and then come back. And usually it's something that reflects like what season it is or the tone of what's going on. So, if it's summer, it's going to be cicadas. But I can remember like a bunch of instances in Kyoto Animation shows where they don't just cut to that. They cut to like an animated thing happening, like a bunch of ants carrying away the cicada or two bugs fighting on a tree. And I really end up thinking about that like to an extent where it does the cutaway almost doesn't have the effect it's supposed to. It's supposed to just give me a breather, and I'm not really meant to process those moments. When anime cuts to power lines, you're not meant to think about the power lines. It's just there to give you breathing room. But when I see the bugs fighting, I think about the bugs fighting, and now I'm kind of distracted and delayed before the next scene starts, I just think they go too far. They put too much stuff in their shows. So yeah, like I think it's possible for anime to be too animated and to go too hard on scenes in ways that will make the audience interpret it differently from how they seemingly are supposed to. But that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm sure some people would much rather that shows do that than not, because you get all this gorgeous animation. I just think this is how I got the wrong idea about Euphonium. I think it's just a matter of not directing it in a way that communicated what they were supposed to be communicating.